Marvel Studios' first ever animated series, What If, has now officially come to an end on Disney Plus with its first season. And this show is so different from all the other shows. Not only the fact that this is animated and the other MCU series are live action, with this series, it's more so an anthology series. Of course, in the end, in the final episodes, we see the crossover with all the characters coming together and all that stuff. But for the most part, each episode was about a different character, different story, different universe. And that's something that made this show really, really cool because it allowed them to take risks. You know, in the movies, you can't kill off characters. I mean, obviously you can, but like if they killed off Iron Man in Endgame, but he's not coming back to life. With What If, it doesn't matter how many times they kill off Tony Stark, he can still come back in the very next episode, and that's exactly what they did. Tony Stark died in every single episode, except for the final one, but he still didn't get to join the team. But anyway, since this is the case for this show, I decided now that season 1 has come to an end, we should go ahead and rank these shows these episodes, because each episode is so different and has its own pros and cons, and there's just some good stuff here. Like, it was a really, really good series, and of course, if you want more in-depth reviews for each episode, go ahead and check out my episode reviews and breakdowns for each and every single episode from Marvel What If Episode 1, but of course, also let me know your rankings in the comments below. How do you rank the episodes of Marvel What If Season 1? So now, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in breaking down Marvel Studios' What If Season 1. So coming in at last place, 9th place, is Episode 1, What If Captain Carter Were the First Avenger? This was a good episode. All of these episodes I really enjoyed and I really had a good time with, but the problem with this episode is that not only is it the first episode of the season, so of course each week it keeps getting better and better and, you know, the expectations go up, but when it comes to this episode, it was pretty much just a retelling of Captain America the First Avenger, just now in animation form, and with Peggy Carter as the super soldier rather than Steve Rogers. Like, there were a few other cool new surprises here, like Steve Rogers as the Hydra Stomper, and Red Skull bringing in this tentacle multiverse beast. Like, there was some cool stuff there, but just for the most part, this episode didn't really bring that much new compared to the movie, whereas most of the other episodes were pretty much completely new stories based off characters and stories from the movies. Now, moving on to 8th place here with episode 6, What If Killmonger Rescued Tony Stark? Again, another good episode. Didn't hate it. I enjoyed it, just not as good as some of the other episodes in the season, because I'm a huge fan of Eric Killmonger, and so I was really excited to see him in this episode. But if I'm being honest, this episode really didn't entertain me that much. Like, Killmonger was just kind of a jerk, and he was like a villain throughout the whole episode. And, you know, literally Tony Stark was in the title of the episode, What If Killmonger Rescued Tony Stark? But then Tony Stark didn't really do that much in the episode. But I did like seeing Killmonger explored more as a character here. I would have liked to see him take on a more heroic light, but I did like seeing Michael B. Jordan back in the role. And also the fact that, like, the episode just ended so abruptly with, like, Shuri and Pepper Potts saying, like, oh, we can do this, team up and, you know, defeat Killmonger, and then that, like, never got resolved, except for in the final episode. But still, definitely one of the weaker episodes of What If Season 1. Now, moving on to 7th place, we have, actually, coincidentally, Episode 7, aka Party Thor episode, titled, What If Thor Were an Only Child? And that's actually one problem I have with it right there, is the title, What If Thor Were an Only Child? Obviously, this has something to do with the story, but it's not really focused on that much. Like, they don't really make it that obvious in the episode that Thor is this way because he was only an only child. We do get to see the ramifications of that with Loki being a frost giant, and that was something I really loved about this episode, because this was a really fun comedic episode compared to the other ones where they had crazy stories. This one was really just kind of reminds me of like an 80s high school movie, like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Like, that's a huge comparison to this episode, because it's very, very similar, where Thor's just going out partying with his friends. We get so many MCU cameos here, and just causing trouble. We get to see that battle between Thor and Captain Marvel, which, by the way, was really awesome to see. But then, of course, his mother finds out about it, and then he has to race to clean up the whole place before his mother gets there to check on him. And, you know, it was really funny. It was a good episode. It's just, you know, it didn't really add that much to the series, and was more so just for a fun episode that really didn't add much to the overall plot of the series. Now moving on to 6th place here with episode 3, What If the World Lost Its Mightiest Heroes? This was honestly, in my opinion, a really underrated episode because a lot of people put this episode at like the bottom of the rankings. But I really enjoyed this episode because this was an Avengers murder mystery, and again, bringing it back to what I was saying earlier, where they can take risks in these shows and kill off characters, and it, just raises the stakes for these characters. You get to see that really come into play in this episode, where the Avengers are getting killed off one by one. And I love murder mystery. I love mysteries in general. So it was a really cool concept to add into here. And also the actual mystery, like the reveal of Hank Pym being the murderer and with him in the yellow jacket was not only something I didn't see coming, which I guess could also be a con because like there wasn't really that many clues in the episode to hint that that was the case, but also it was so cool to see Hank Pym as a villain, as Yellow Jacket, because that's something that happened in the comics. So I really love seeing that in this episode. It was a really fun episode, and you got to see Loki once again, and just all these different characters in these different scenarios that I really enjoyed. And then you get the cliffhanger set up at the end with Nick Fury trying to set up a new Avengers with Captain Marvel and then also Captain America, and then as we see at the end of the season that the Apocalypse Black Widow goes to join them. But yeah, really solid episode. Again, that comes in at 6th place in the ranking. But now moving on to 5th place with episode 8, What If Ultron Won? This was last week's episode, and very similar to our last episode, where most people put that at the bottom of the list. This is one where most people put it like at the tippity top of their list, but I'm putting it here at number 5 because while I did really enjoy the episode, I loved seeing Ultron and Vision come to power because Ultron is such a crazy powerful villain in the comics, and he was honestly kind of wasted in the MCU with Age of Ultron, which really was more like 2.5 days of Ultron, if I'm being honest. You really got to see the Age of Ultron in this episode, and just seeing how powerful he is, like that moment where Thanos walked through the portal, Vision just sliced him in half with the Mind Stone in mere seconds. That, like, Vision's one of my favorite characters in the MCU too, so I love seeing that, seeing how powerful that character really is. And of course, we also get to see the Watcher come into play here. I love that battle between the Watcher and Ultron. Definitely reminds me of just like that crazy fighting style and choreography and cinematography that we saw from battles in like Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. It was just that level of battle, and I love seeing it so much because the Watcher was mostly just a narrator for the first part of this series, but in this episode he really came into play and battled Ultron. It was so cool to see. Of course, we also had the storyline with Clint and Natasha going on as well, which I wasn't hugely invested in. I do like how Clint made the sacrifice to kind of parallel from Natasha's sacrifice in Avengers Endgame, but definitely not as good as some of the other episodes in this season. So now let's move on to 4th place, which again coincidentally is episode 4, What If Doctor Strange Lost His Heart Instead of His Hands? This episode was so good because going into it, I wasn't really that excited for it. I was like, oh cool, evil Doctor Strange, I guess that's cool. But then actually seeing it was so awesome because there's so many layers to this episode and this character or characters, because it's really a character study on Dr. Stephen Strange, where you see he makes this one slight change and it just sends him down this dark path and craving power. And it's just so interesting because, it makes sense with the version of Doctor Strange that we've seen in the MCU films. He's a very egotistical guy, and if he did lose his heart, aka Christine Palmer, then it would make sense if he did something like this. And again, just seeing him go on this journey, seeing him become this ultra powerful character, and of course in the end it all basically being for nothing because then the whole universe gets destroyed anyway. He's able to bring back his Christine, but then she dies too, and then he's just trapped in this prison of his own making. And it's so good in so many levels, and I love it so much. Such a good episode. Speaking of good episodes, we have today's episode, the season 1 finale, Marvel What If episode 9, aka What if the Watcher broke his oath? This is, of course, the culmination of this season, where, of course, most of it was just individual episodes, but this is where everything comes together. We get the formation of the Guardians of the Multiverse battling Ultravision, or Ultron, whatever you want to call him. And it was so cool. You know, it's like the same thing we had with, like, even the first Avengers movie, and especially with Infinity War and Endgame, where it's just so cool to see all of these superheroes fighting together in one place at one time and seeing them work together, see their team dynamics. It was just so cool to see. Now, reason it's not higher up on the list, because, you know, it really wasn't the greatest episode. Like, I loved all the fight scenes, but I do wish it was a bit longer. If we maybe got a little more interaction between some of our characters from the Guardians of the Multiverse. And I am kind of a little disappointed with how it ended. Like, obviously it makes sense for everything to go back to the way it was, where, like, they all just go back to their separate universes, but at the same time, would have been cool if there was maybe some sort of lasting effect here as well. And of course, we did get that post-credit scene too. But yeah, really fun episode, kind of similar to, like, the Party Thor episode, where it's like a fun episode, but, like, not the greatest quality episode. But still, I had a fun time and I really enjoyed it. Then moving on to second place here with episode 2, What If T'Challa Became a Star-Lord? This episode, woo, so good. I mean, there's so many good episodes in this season, but specifically this one, because of course we get the return of Chadwick Boseman, and that's one of the reasons that this episode is so emotional, is of course because after the loss of Chadwick Boseman, this is the final appearance of Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa. Well, not specifically in this episode, but in this series, and especially to see him in this new iteration of the character, it was so cool to see, especially because, like, throughout this whole episode, it's basically proving how great of a character T'Challa is, that he was able to change Thanos, make him a good guy just from talking to him, and just, like, T'Challa's use of kindness and hopefulness and joy, and it was just so good. And again, as I mentioned before, Thanos being a hero here, that was cool to see. His relationship with Nebula was pretty cool in this episode. Speaking of that, the relationship between Nebula and T'Challa, or should I say, was it Cha-Cha? I think that's what it was. And then also getting to see the Ravagers here. You got Yondu, you got Kraglin, Taserface was there. And them all going up against the Collector. That was pretty cool to see. The Black Order, I love seeing the Black Order being there, working for the Collector. Of course, Howard the Duck showed up. Always love some Howard the Duck. And it was just a fun episode, you know, like these other ones, but it had those other layers to it as well. And just, like, it was just a good episode. I really, really enjoyed seeing T'Challa as Star-Lord, because, you know, you combine those two things of T'Challa and the whole Black Panther and Wakanda culture and mythos, combining it with Guardians of the Galaxy, because I love the Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm a big fan of the Guardians of the Galaxy animated series, so this kind of felt like an episode of a Guardians of the Galaxy animated series, where you get to see just one of the Guardians of the Galaxy adventures, except obviously this is just the Ravagers and not the full-on Guardians of the Galaxy, but it's just such a good episode. So good. But the only thing that tops that is episode 5, coming in at first place, episode 5, What If Zombies? Do I need to explain? I mean, literally the title of the episode is What If Zombies? Yeah, it was amazing. It was such a good episode because, again, blends all those things I want here. It was a fun episode. You got all those crazy MCU characters popping up, and you really get invested in the story. Like, it's only a half-hour episode, but you really get invested in the story here. Like, I mean, it's a zombies episode, but that's not even the big thing that you get invested with here. Like, obviously, I love seeing zombie Captain America and zombie Iron Man and zombie Hawkeye and all these zombie Avengers, but it's really our ragtag group of misfits that are these survivors of this zombie apocalypse that you really fall in love with, because a lot of these characters haven't really got their time to shine on the big screen yet. Like, for example, the Wasp, Hope Van Dyne. She is such a good character in this episode, way better than she is in the MCU. So I'm really hoping we get a very similar characterization in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I loved her in this episode. And speaking of that, I loved her relationship with Peter Parker. Peter Parker was so good in this episode as well. Even though we didn't have Tom Holland doing the voice, I think his name was Hudson James that did the voice, and didn't really sound like Tom Holland, but I liked the voice. I thought he was a really cool character. And again, you get to see more sides of Tom Holland's version of Peter Parker here, even though it's not actually Tom Holland. You get to see him doing the movie references. I love his new suit. This is based off the suit that Spider-Man wears at the Avengers campus in Disneyland, or maybe it's Disney World. I don't know. I always get the two mixed up. And of course, the Uncle Ben reference. That was so good to see. And just all the characters in this episode. Of course, Vision. Again, Vision is one of my favorite MCU characters, so I loved seeing his whole thing here with Wanda and her being a zombie. And it was just such a fun episode. I love seeing all of these various MCU characters here, no matter how big or small their role was. Like, we got to see Kurt show up here and Happy Hogan. Obviously, they died and they turned into zombies, but it was still cool to see them. Paul Rudd as Scott Lang was literally just a head in the jar this episode, but that was amazing. And of course, we end off with a cliffhanger with Zombie Thanos, which is honestly probably one of the most iconic shots from this season, is Zombie Thanos, and really makes me want a part 2 to this in season 2. So I'm really hoping that we get that, because of course, at the end of the episode, we had 3 remaining survivors. We had Spider-Man, we had T'Challa, and then we had Scott Lang, and they were taking the Mind Stone to Wakanda, only to be met by Zombie Thanos. So I'd love a part 2. I really hope we get a part 2 in season 2, because it was just such a good episode. Honestly, we could get a whole project about Marvel Zombies, whether it's live action or animated. There was actually a report a couple weeks ago that we are getting some sort of live action Marvel Zombies project. So definitely check out that video that I did on that if you haven't already. But yeah, guys, that was Marvel What If season 1, episodes ranked. This is so good. It was such a good show because, again, it's so different from everything else we've seen. And, you know, that is also one thing that, honestly, in my opinion, makes it the weakest of the MCU Disney Plus series we've seen before. Because, you know, with the other ones, you get invested with the story, and it's the same story for all the episodes, and you can theorize about stuff. With this, you can't really do it as much, but that's another thing that makes it cool and unique, is that each episode has its own standout moments and standout characters and its own stories. And again, you're able to take those risks with this animated multiverse, and it was just such a fun ride. And I am so excited for season 2. No idea when it's coming, but definitely excited for. Of course, our next MCU Disney Plus series is Hawkeye. Super duper excited for that. Most anticipated project of Phase 4. But anyways, guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think about Marvel Studios' What If Season 1? Again, let me know your rankings of all the episodes in the comments below. And of course, thanks so much for watching. Please drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and hit the subscribe button so I keep you up to date on everything that goes on in the Marvel life.